So I'm Vaughan Wilkins. I'm going to talk to you about a concept I've been working on and researching for the last 20 years called enculturated captivity. Specifically today, I want to try to talk about it in regards to ecotherapy or applied ecopsychology, as I like to call it. Largely, I find that when we begin a conversation about applied ecopsychology, we're never starting in the same world, right? Especially when we're talking about what we're treating or how we're going to treat it. We're rarely on the same page. Ecotherapy is just ballooned into this giant thing where we almost have to specify what type of ecotherapy we're doing. And a lot of this has to do with inconsistencies and conflicts in the parent discipline of ecopsychology.
On, can you speak up a little bit?
Oh, wow. All right. Yeah, thanks for letting me know here. It might be on the wrong. Oh.
Yeah, when you stand further back, we can't hear you as well as we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Just on the
That was better.
There we
go.
Yeah, sorry, it was just on the wrong mic. Thanks for that.
That's great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, there we go. So as I was saying, when we begin a conversation about ecotherapy or applied ecopsychology, we're rarely on the same page. And a lot of that has to do with some conflicts that were just developed in the creation and evolution of ecopsychology. The first wave began as a reframe on sanity. It was very critical of traditional psychology and culture, modern culture in general. Essentially, the way we're living is making us sick. And by supporting a traumatogenic, pathogenic baseline of sanity, traditional psychology and normative culture are actually condoning us to continue living in a way that's making us go extinct and killing the planet. So they were largely focused on looking for collective pathologies, right? Diagnosing our culture with an illness so that we could treat it. And while they had very disparate and different diagnoses, they continued to come back to this idea of us being a species out of context, away from the ancestral ecologies that we evolved. Now, when the second wave of ecopsychology came along, it was largely being so critical and indicting modern culture and psychology. Ecopsychology didn't have a lot of friends. So second wave ecopsychology attempted to bring it in more participation with the larger field of psychology, but in so doing, turned it into a subfield of psychology that focused on the healing benefits of nature. And having a conversation about ecotherapy, depending on which one of those worlds you're coming from, is going to be very different. So I went looking to try to sort this out and figure out what was this mystery pathology illness that the first wave of ecopsychology was trying to find. Because some forms of ecotherapy are actually doing more harm than good. If people are seeking out therapy for natural responses to an unnatural way we're living, and then we're helping them readapt back to a destructive society, are we really doing any good there? By making a happy destroyer who can return to the status quo and keep doing what we're doing, I don't know that that's of any benefit. We're really just perpetuating this traumatogenic baseline of sanity. And this red line here is my example of this. Linda Bazell breaks ecotherapy up into two categories, level 1 and level 2. Level 1 uses nature as a tool to treat human problems. So you're depressed, you're having marital issues, we'll give you some ecotherapy and bring you back up to this baseline that traditional psychology calls sane. Level 2 ecotherapy instead focuses on your relationship with your ecology as the focus of therapy, and begins at that traumatogenic baseline to try to move towards a regenerative and mutually beneficial cycle of healing between self and system. So when we come back to this question of what we're treating and how do we treat it, I wasn't getting a straight answer. So I went looking in other fields. And it turns out that the impacts of a loss of ecological participation exist across species, and we are not the only species who has lost our ecology. In fact, captivity is the common thread, and it creates a particular constellation of symptoms across species, including humans. In non-human animals, it's called zoochosis. And it's characterized by abnormal, repetitive, self-harming behaviors, right? It does not occur in wild populations. And it is indicative of a discord between the organism and their artificial environment. So when we look back at the kind of mystery illness, the cultural pathology that ecopsychology was attempting to identify, I'm starting to hit some bells here, right? Again, we're looking at abnormal, repetitive, self-harming behaviors, something that occurs in the context of captivity, and something that has us being a species out of context, that has the harm coming from this setup. One of the main theories of why this happens is called ecological needs. Essentially, in the co-evolutionary dance that creates bodies and minds, my behaviors, my cognition are also crafted and just as integral to that process. So I have my fingers and thumbs and stand on 2 feet because of the evolutionary dance of myself and system. An elephant has a trunk and ears from that same dance. The body morphology is shaped by the world around us. And at the same time, so are our behaviors and cognitive processes, right? And these behaviors and cognitive processes exist across species, called species-specific behaviors or species-typical behaviors. And they serve to connect us with our ecosystems, right? In mutual reciprocity and mutual vitality. If I am participating in the way that I was designed to with my system is healthier. If I am participating with my system in the way I was designed to, I am healthier. And if we thwart these behaviors, right, we prevent them from occurring, a void is created. And this void is filled with abnormal, repetitive, self-harming behaviors. Some examples, maybe you've seen some of these at the zoos or in other documentaries. You've got animals pulling out their feathers, their fur, chewing on their arms, injuring themselves. I'm sure you've seen the pacing or the bobbing behaviors, wind sucking or bar biting. If you've seen the documentary Blackfish with Tilikum, that's a great demonstration of the aggression and harm and psychosis that comes from living in captive systems. And we are a pharmacological society. So most animals you've ever seen on display at any of these institutions are medicated. They're on some sort of mood stabilizer, tranquilizer, Prozac, right? As are many people you will meet these days as well. But another intervention, one that is preferred and I think has gained a lot of popularity over the last 30 years, is something very much akin to ecotherapy. And it's called environmental enrichment. And essentially, it's creating mimics, ways for an organism to bring in more of those species-specific behaviors, to reconnect with their bodies and their environment in the ways of their ancestral ecology. Some of this has to do with feeding devices, foraging, hunting behaviors. Some of it's just the ways that they interact with other species or with their own species. And what we find is it actually stops these abnormal, repetitive, self-harming behaviors. So I went through the literature and wrote my dissertation on this and have been doing some other work with it for a while now, and looked at ecotherapy and environmental enrichment and found that they were looking at analogous cause, analogous symptoms, and treatments. They're predicated on the loss of ecological participation. They both cited a contextual mismatch between the organism and the environment. They're both looking at collective issues, not a personal pathology. They both used activity-based therapies to mimic or recreate these ancestral connections. And they were both being used to mitigate symptoms brought on by being trapped in an artificial environment. So if we look back at what the first wave of ecopsychology was looking for, this cultural pathology, what arises when we become a species out of context, it stands to reason we're looking at some form of a human zoochosis. But given that zoochosis exists across species and is the exclusive domain of captivity, it doesn't exist in the wild. And if we have it, we are captive inside of something. So if we are, then what is the nature of that captivity? Where are the bars? Can we see them? And then how much of our lives are the symptoms of being a species out of context? How much of what we see other people and ourselves doing every day are abnormal, repetitive, self-harming behaviors or unconscious enrichment activities? How many of our addictions are consumptive behaviors? How much of our school violence or just violence in general is a result of an abnormal, repetitive, self-harming behavior? How many of our exercise programs or sports or media consumptions are attempts and enrichment activities, right? Of trying to bring back some of our ancestral connections. And funny enough, they've actually started to put treadmills and resistance pools in zoo enclosures. They've given television to primates, and they've even tried to put monkey porn on some of them, right? To try to mitigate the boredom of a life of captivity. So then if we're talking about using enrichment to treat human zoochosis, then I suppose we arrive at some sort of Pleistocenic enrichment, right? Because our species emerged in the Pleistocene. So if we went looking for some sort of ancestral behavioral ecology, that's where we'd be looking. And at least conceivably, the last 10,000 years, in terms of like a theoretical lens, have really done little over evolutionary time to alter our cognition or our physiology. So as a therapeutic endeavor, we've got kind of rewilding wilderness schools that could really stand to give us some of our ancestral connections back. And then culturally, the idea of us going back to the land, of recreating a hunter-gatherer lifestyle would be the kind of call and attempt here. But before we get too carried away with that, I wanted to, where things shifted for me was moving into transspecies psychology. So that's where we're going to go next, because so much of the work that's been done in zoos up until this point has been done from ethology or animal behavior. And when we move over to looking at zoochosis from a transspecies lens, we find that human exceptionalism is actually a falsity, right? The idea of humans up here and the rest of the animal kingdom below a line somewhere else is nonsense, right? Because an analogous neural architecture, the same but different brain structures, exist across species, meaning that across species there is love, there are emotion, mentation, memory, cognition, language, culture, tool use, sentience. And once that's been established, we start to notice that there are actually disorders and mental illness that are also analogous across species. The weird thing is that they have different names. So the same diagnosis in a medical textbook for humans is called one thing, and in the veterinary textbook called something else. So Natterson and Horowitz wrote a book called Zubiquity, and one of the examples they give is this Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, which is a stress-related heart disorder that just has the heart seize up. In the veterinary textbook, the same thing, same diagnosis, same result, is called capture myopathy. So for me, I went looking. What about zoochosis? Is there already, do we need to call it human zoochosis, or is there already a name in the human world for what we've been diagnosing as zoochosis in zoos? And yeah, it's called complex post-traumatic stress disorder. It's the prolonged and repeated trauma. It occurs only in circumstances of captivity when the victim is a prisoner and unable to flee. So you might be familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder, the lasting effects of a shock trauma, an acute event like a attack or abuse or a car accident. Whereas complex post-traumatic stress disorder is repeated. It's more of the slow burn. So growing up in a misattuned household, living in a police state, growing up in a racist society. And if we go back and look in the animal world, yep, it's already been evidenced that non-human animals do experience post-traumatic stress disorder and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So zoochosis is just a speciesist name for CPTSD. So let's bring it back together here. So we've got complex post-traumatic stress disorder is actually the disease of captivity, not zoochosis. It can be created by physical captivity, such as prisoners of war, or the classic psychological case study of Jeannie, who spent the first 13 years of her life in one room tied to a potty chair. And in animals, the famous Harlow monkey studies, where he took infant monkeys and put them in a device he called the pit of despair to actually give them complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Interesting enough, he was studying love. So I don't know, when we talk about objective science, it's like, that's what that guy called love. We're calling it objective. Interesting. At the same time, CPTSD can also be created by psychological captivity. So growing up, like I said, with domestic violence, neglect, insecure attachment, bullying. But it doesn't have to be some big extreme thing, right? It can range all the way up to extreme violence, but also just having feelings of not belonging, being unwanted, being chronically misunderstood, or being taught to live in a culture that forces you to destroy your life support system. So if we just put this together, the collective pathology first identified by ecopsychology in its first wave is analogous to zoochosis. Zoochosis is analogous to complex post-traumatic stress disorder. It stands to reason then that modern humans are suffering from a collective form of complex post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of their nature-disconnected lives. So if we got to put this to the test, in order for that to be true, complex post-traumatic stress disorder would have to be created by seemingly benign events. We wouldn't be able to notice it. And it's true. There's evidence for that. CPTSD, developmental trauma, attachment trauma, it's all seemingly benign. It's hard to notice. It would need to be able to be passed down intergenerationally. Absolutely, it can. And then lastly, it would need to be able to impact entire collectives. And from historical trauma, we actually see that it can, of course, impact full collectives. And interestingly enough, if we take the disparate diagnoses from the first wave of ecopsychology, all the different symptoms that they were identifying, CPTSD actually can stand as a banner to collect them all together. In the same way that we were really ineffective as a people at treating PTSD until we had that as a diagnosis, people were just being diagnosed with all sorts of different things. And it took the diagnosis of PTSD to actually collect those together and create actually beneficial and useful interventions. I'm hoping the same thing here can happen for us with CPTSD and the world we're living in. But instead of calling it zoochosis or human zoochosis or collective intergenerational CPTSD, I go with enculturated captivity. It's a cage that's constructed through norms and conventions and a faulty definition of sanity. It condones living in a way that is killing our own life support system. And by living in a way that is anti-ecological and hurting us, but then naming it sanity, we validate and condone it and then teach it to our kids. It becomes the secret cage that prevents us from living as functioning members of the Earth community. So when we stand there and wonder why this environmental initiative ended or failed, why can't people just do something different? It's because we're growing up in a set of norms. They're actually physiologically changing our brains and our nervous systems to live in a low-grade trauma state and adapt maladaptive behaviors that are not good for our survival or the survival of the planet, but we can't move beyond them because we're not treating them. We're just living in it. So there's a lot more to this, and I do other talks on it, and there's things on my website, and I work with therapists and groups to build these programs. What I'll just offer to you here as kind of my final thoughts or an attempt at coaching anyone building an ecotherapy practice. When possible, return to the world right? Being human means having a healthy ecology. If you don't have an ecology and you feel okay about it, that's we haven't arrived at full level 2 ecotherapy there, right? And when we decorate the cage, instead of opening the cage door, we're essentially perpetuating captivity, right? All those toys, devices, games that we're giving to zoo animals reduce their suffering, thereby make it more likely they're going to stay in captivity because people aren't banging down the doors trying to get them out. So again, when we have a responsibility of working with people, it's not just to return them to be happy destroyers. It's about helping us move towards what does a reciprocal vitality look like for all life, right? Decenter the human. It's not just about us. So when it comes down to what are we treating and how are we going to treat it, I think that's my question for you. We're in a third wave of ecopsychology now. We left the first and second behind, and we don't know what this third one is. So I think my question for all of you is, what are you going to make your ecotherapy practice one that you keep for yourself or offer to others? What's that going to be and what's that going to look like? Thank you.
Thank you, Vaughan. That was really great and informative. Do we have any questions? Let me see. I've got one online. It says, brilliant work. Glad you ended with recognizing the problem of just decorating a cage. On another note, have you read Tyson Yocopoulos-Sand's talk? And if so, any thoughts on his conspiracy theory that public education was developed to mimic the domestication of animals and create more complement citizenry?
I mean, I was a teacher for, for a bunch of years. So yeah, I've worked with kids, and like a lot of what I was seeing would map to that. I would say there's a difference between education and schooling. I'd say a lot of our education system in North America is based on schooling. So yeah, indoctrination and creating a pliable workforce. That makes sense to me. Education means something completely different, right? Like if you break it down etymologically, it's shun is the process of, duca is like duke, duchess, induction, deduction. It means to lead. And then E is the same as EX for exit. So we put it together, and education is actually the process of leading out. So when we're talking about captivity, I am an educator. I don't school people. But I haven't read that person's work though. So I would love to, if you could send me an email, I'd love to have the reference. That'd be great.
Thank you.
So are there any questions in the room here? Yes, Sarah, Grenovitt.
Someone else, I already asked one.
Go for it.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Vaughan, thank you so much for being here. I'm just such a fan of this work and grateful to you for sharing it. I have a question about the implications of not decorating the cage. It seems like there's maybe an implication there then that we need to go through kind of a passageway of suffering. Like, is the implication there that we need to actually really feel the suffering that this lifestyle creates in order to then kind of break free of it?
I would say, I think there's a recognition that I would say we're all hurting, and that many of the things we're going to therapy for or being medicated out of, or binge watching Mobland on Netflix, are because we're facing really real collective issues. And the more that we as healers, psychologists, therapists are treating these as individual, not collective problems, then we have people just returning to this main stage and feeling better about it. The more we use ecotherapy to kind of perpetuate the status quo, I think is where we're hurting. So beyond like widespread transformational change, I don't know that there's no way to be sane in an insane society. There's no way to be healthy in a sick system. So it does mean real change. I think my call is for ecopsychology and those of us actually paying attention to this question to stop painting the cage, right? It's not meant to be like necessarily like a call out, like I always hate that when it's like, I'm actually showing up to the conversation. Why are you yelling at me? It's like, I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to say it is our responsibility for the people that come to conferences like this. This is political, right? We can't just be objective and baseline therapists. We really need to take a stand on this. And I'd really hope that ecopsychology journals would also move us back towards some of the revolutionary initiatives of wave one and less towards things about how I can improve my test scores by going camping for 3 days.
Yeah, thank you, Vaughan.
I've got one other question here. What do you consider will be important to research and explore heading into the third wave of ecotherapy?
Oh my gosh, I love that question. The third wave is like, I'm like kind of hanging my hopes on the third wave. I have so much hope for us with the third wave. I think some of the main things that I think have already come up are like decentering whiteness, decentering Eurocentrism, like Europeanism, decentering like maleness. Like we've been doing this. We're moving there. If you in your area there, I've moved away from California, so but Phoenix Smith is in Oakland. So if you want to like see somebody who's really doing third wave, I think Phoenix Smith is a pioneer in Oakland of third wave ecotherapy. Beyond that, I would say it's about moving away from human-centric problems. We got into this thinking about us. The Anthropocene is the stupidest name. I'm so sorry. It's so self-involved. Like we got to come up with something else. One, it should be called the Androcene if we really want to blame somebody for the problems, right? It was men. It wasn't everybody. Right? Who was running the world? Patriarchy. So Anthropocene is such a stupid name. So go with Androcene, or let's just call it something else that actually decenters us out of the conversation. So what does it look like to be involved in ecotherapies? If you want to do animal-assisted therapy, this animal is not a transference object, right? This animal is not a stuffy for you to feel better about yourself and like de-stress at finals, right? What does it look like to actually give back? Like, so how do we create centers that are about people that need help, helping, like rescue to rescue? How do I support and heal another being so that I'm healed? How do we move into systems of reciprocity, mutual vitality? It's not about me. It's not what I get out of this, it's about what I give. That's how I re-enter the system. Not sure if that answers it, but it felt fun to say. So thanks.
Thank you. And I do have one more question in the chat, if that's okay, Mary.
Please.
Yes, go ahead, please.
It says, let me look here. They say you are what you eat. If all of this is exposed and even mainstream knows such deep collective issues, traumas, what do you think it would really take to lessen the harm of animals and spread sanity? How can people stop painting the cage? In other words, beyond academia, what do you plan to do in order to progress this essential movement?
Yeah, so for me, I actually didn't start with academia. And to be honest with you, I left academia. I'm doing this because I love talking about this, and I would love one person who was like, I want to be an ecotherapist, but I'm not sure how to do it, to like reach out and I can help. That's honestly why I'm here. But I worked with dogs for 15 years, like actually went out and tried to heal what we're doing to them, and the same methods work, right? And then went out and worked with kids for that long. So I think in some ways it's about building a new consciousness of actually working with young people and having them grow up inside different norms, but having them grow up inside something different, changing the relationship of how we see ourselves in the relation to the rest of life, calling ourselves animals, right? Recognizing that we are animals. So I don't actually think the answer is in academia at all. But how do we support more animals? Give me the San Diego Zoo. Like, I think if our zoos turned into like healing centers, where there's one in Montreal that is all domestic animals that have been, or sorry, not domestic, what do I want to say? Local wildlife, not exotics, that were injured or hurt by hunters or something, that are brought to this facility, that they are then healed, and the volunteers work with them, and volunteers are getting ecotherapy, the animals are getting healed, and then they're getting re-released. And the public is paying for it and getting educated and getting to watch this process. So I do think there are ways for us to move into systems change where we have some institutions like zoos that say they're about education and breeding the millennium arc. They're not. They're making money. They're making money. I wrote a breeding program for a zoo when I did my master's, right? They're trying to make money by selling animals. So if we want to do something different, we got to change the system. How do we do that beyond the grassroots? I don't know. Give me an email. Let's brainstorm together. Let's get to work. Let's put a team together and get to work.
Thank you, Vaughan.